Okay, we are live with Facebook, so take it away, Gail.
Thank you so much, Mary, and welcome and thank you for joining the Nova Public Library as we discuss talking racism. We have had some great conversation. I'm really excited about this one. I think it's going to be lots of fun and informative. I have all ladies here. That just happened that way, all moms, but we should do a fantastic job. We're talking about how do you talk to your kids about racism. We want a Black perspective, a white perspective. We have perspectives from the professionals. We have Dr. Katherine Gothard here and Dr. Rose Moten here. We also have Paula Hentry, who is once again a parent, and she is the president of the Parents of African American Students of Novi. And we also have Amy Saunders here, who is a mother of 3, and she's a hardworking parent in the school system as well. So welcome to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. And for me, I think starting off first, we're going to jump right into talking about this subject. And I believe the first thing you do before talking to your kids about racism is maybe doing a self-assessment of how you stand in terms of racism. Do you have any racism or racist bone in your body? Sometimes they word it that way. And maybe starting there can help to address how you move forward with talking to your children. And without me calling any particular name first, whoever is willing to kind of step in and maybe touch on that subject, I'm willing to take it away from there, please.
Well, I can go ahead and start, Gail. Thank you so much for having me. What's interesting with my story is that we lived in Detroit for we've been in Novi for the last 10 years. So prior to moving to Novi, we lived in Detroit. So everything was in our community. You know, we went to school, we went to church, and I was involved in everything was in the African American community. And so when we moved to Novi was when conversations needed to be had because we were different. And I honestly didn't really understand the fullness of it until I actually got to Novi. Living and working in Detroit was a different part of life for me before moving to Novi. Even working from Detroit and then moving into Belleville when I worked in a school that was primarily white, learning what privilege was in my late 40s, you know, because I had been involved with just my own people, just to call a spade what it is. And so I didn't understand what privilege was until I started working at another school once I left Detroit Public Schools. So it was eye-opening for me. So then having to explain it and talk with my kids about it was different. And we had to talk about it when there was an incident. It wasn't something that we just, hey, let's have a conversation about racism. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there had to be an incident for us to have that conversation. So that was a lot of my experiences dealing with learning what privilege was and racism and being a quote unquote minority. I got a track scholarship to go to Central Michigan University. And again, from the community that I came from, it was all Black. And so when I got to Central Michigan in Mount Pleasant, and I graduated in 1987, so I'm a little, you know, I'm in my fabulous 50s.
Super young still.
Super young still. So being up in Mount Pleasant, it was different than what Mount Pleasant is now. So again, didn't even know what a minority was because again, I was in the majority. So it was some eye-opening experiences for me, and then having to explain that to my children when we had an incident was kind of how the racism talk came along for us.
And I think that does make a difference as well. Sometimes when you're in the community of where the people are pretty much the same racial background as you tend to maybe not always have these conversations. And we can see how necessary it is now as we move forward. Amy, as a parent, can you tell me a little bit about how you teach your children about racism, if you do or if you don't?
We in the house, we take advantage of when certain things came up. If we're watching a movie and something comes up, we then have the discussion. So we kind of have let life dictate when the conversations happen. Mm-hmm. So we didn't like sit down and pointedly say, you know, anyone is different than you are, or you are, you know, different than they are. We waited until something came up at school or something came up just in socializing. And in one way, I thought it was a really good way to do it because when we've gone to church, we've always had a diverse members of the church. So there's really never been a point where the kids go somewhere and it's purposely, they're the all white kids. When my daughter was in high school, and we have a high school that has a diverse group, and she tried out for cheerleading and she made the team and everything. And at one point she was referred to as a token white girl because on the team, all the other girls happened to be black. There was
That happens in reverse too, huh? I mean, I shouldn't, that's the first time I've heard it in reverse.
But you know
Black
what?
people hear it all the time.
No, and then my youngest on the football team has been the token white boy. And now, mind you, my kids have red hair. So they're not only like the token white kid, they're the token white kid with the red hair. So they already stand out. So, I mean, in a certain sense, it made it really easy to find my kid amongst the team because I just had to look for the pale legs. And I'm like, okay, there's my kid. But in the sense of having to talk about how things are different, it was so funny because like with football, when the coach would speak a certain way, and my youngest one is like, Mom, he's like really aggressive and really this, or my daughter would be like, Mom, the coach told me to call her auntie. I don't know what that means. Like, why would I call her auntie? And we had to like literally find out, okay, Carly, it's like, it's a nice thing to call somebody auntie. It's like, she's trying to let you know you're family and she's going to treat you like family. And it was just so funny because like, it took all the way to high school to have those conversations with the kids. So
Auntie. Did she say auntie or did she say aunt?
Right. That's what I was thinking too.
You know what? I cannot specifically say because again, this is my daughter who relayed it to me that she wanted, the coach wanted her to call her. And again, my daughter just said auntie because, we refer to people as aunt, but no, it was auntie specifically. And again, I had to explain to her because again, being in the school, I kind of knew it from the other kids. And she's always like, well, I know people call each other like moms, like this is, like, hey mom, this, that. She goes, but never an aunt. And I go, it's okay. It's still a good thing.
Dr. Katherine, can you speak on, we're talking about some not talking about racism with their children until they're much older and where situations force them to. Will you speak on what is age appropriate and when should we start talking to our children about racism?
Well, what we know developmentally is that if you grow up in an all white family or all black family, like Paula was saying, we know that we become accustomed to seeing a white face, white features, and then that's what we know.
Right.
And we are learning that if you want to change some of this is to make sure that your children of all ages are around black people, black children. So they then become familiar. So it's not like a surprise. When Quentin, my son, was 2.5, now I come from a family that has black in it. I have brother and sister that I have a brother and sister that are half black and half white. And I had a stepfather who was black, and I grew up in the 60s. So that was quite interesting with all the racial rights and everything going on. So when Quentin was 2.5, he'd always been around my family. But at 2.5, we were in Florida in a General Dollar, and he said, Mom, God made brown people too. And there was 2 black women there that were shopping, and he was just so shocked. And I was like, how does he not know this? Because my brother's half black, and but they were, darker skin, and he was just so surprised that God made brown skinned people too. So I think that it's okay to introduce them and have them around black children, so it's not such a shock, and that they become familiar. And then as they become familiar, you're continually, and they play together, then you're introducing equality. Everything is equal. Everything is fair. And they don't grow up feeling that they're better. And it does require the parents as well to step in and definitely guide that and direct that and create that neutral zone. I think that when, your son exclaims that God made brown people too, it's like, yes, he made all colored people. And you just start talking about it. It just, coming from where I came from the 60s, I grew up with, I was called a, reverse Oreo. And so I didn't want my son, especially having to wait 25 years for him to grow up, thinking that racism was okay, that he was any different because of his skin. So I believe that at all eight, you could just start talking to them about how this, I don't mean to minimize pigment, but that's almost what we have to do, in my opinion, in order for children to understand you're no different, you're no better, you're no more privileged, and other than what society's allowing, but you are, you're equal. And to start right from the get-go, you are equal. Doesn't matter what color you are, that you share toys, you share the sandbox, you share the pool, you share whatever you have. And so I don't think there's a specific age that you don't talk about it. You just immediately start neutralizing this hierarchy of that white is supreme. And it's interesting because just today, and here we're having this talk, and my son is reading about Mr. Rogers, and his name slips my mind, the gentleman that was on there, and he was the first Black man that he brought on. And then Quentin was telling me about Mr. Rogers and this and that, and Quentin said something about normal. And I looked at him and I'm thinking, here, I prided myself on my child not being racist. And I said, what do you mean normal? He says, well, normal like our family. And it kind of, shocked me, because I don't want him to think that being Black is abnormal. And I was just, I said, my head's spinning. I'm trying to keep chill about it. What do you mean by normal? Well, normal like our family, Mom, white like our family. And but that scared me. So I think even addressing that, if they say normal, they use and categorize as normal. What does that mean? Black people are abnormal? So you just, at all ages, you just keep introducing it and just neutralize.
Dr. Rose?
Yeah, as Dr. Kathy, that's okay, Dr. Kathy or Catherine?
Katherine, yeah, Dr. Katherine.
Dr. Katherine was saying, it's developmentally, you just have to address it what's appropriate developmentally. So you're going to have a conversation, as Amy was sharing the story about her, the experience with, the young child looking and saying, oh my gosh, your hands are dirty. That's developmentally what a child at that age would say. And so you would explain, as the gentleman did so perfectly by turning his hand over, and it was like, that was it. The whole situation was neutralized for the kid. But for a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, the conversation has to be different. As a mother of 4 children, each and every one of my children have experienced some form of some racial incident throughout their school years, as well as even at our home when we had my son, and I'll discuss that, when he was surrounded by 2 West Bloomfield police officers coming home from basketball practice, because he fit the description of someone who looked suspicious in the neighborhood. But I have a 7-year-old daughter now who's in the Grosse Pointe School District, who just recently started a social justice program with the Grosse Pointe school system. And she has an Instagram page with it as well. But when she started that, and she was combining all the high schools together to kind of just start the dialogue, there was so much pushback from parents. Like, there were nasty messages that my 16-year-old was getting from parents about, how dare you start this, accused her of being a socialist. I mean, it just went kind of across the board. So what we have now is a group of people who don't have a problem discussing it. But, our issue as society is that we have so many individuals that avoid the subject altogether. And the reason they avoid it, in psychology, we know avoidance is a defense mechanism. And the more we avoid, the more reinforcing it becomes, because we know this whole topic of racial tension, systemic racism in our society is a very uncomfortable topic. That doesn't mean we don't talk about it, but for a lot of people, because of the discomfort they have with it, they will avoid at all costs recognizing it and even talking about it, because it's just more comfortable for them. My daughter recently, I want to share this as well. She recently went and participated in one of the protests downtown Detroit. And I live downtown Detroit. She goes to school from her dad's home in Grosse Pointe area. But I live downtown Detroit. And so she was coming back home with her picket sign and, after spending hours walking miles and miles, in a peaceful demonstration. And my neighbor next to me, whom I really, I've only talked to him a few times. We don't see each other much. When he saw her with the sign, and he was a white male, he said, "See, you're doing it the right way." And I was already in the house when I heard that. And and I stopped in my tracks and said, what did he say? Because it was almost implying, what he meant was, you're down there walking, do it peacefully, don't cause any disturbance that makes us uncomfortable, so to speak. That's the way I took it. So, good girl for doing it the right way. And he didn't even realize. I tried to catch him before he got on the elevator because I was going to have that conversation with him. He didn't even realize the connotations of what he said, considering that moment in time. We're talking 6 weeks ago when it was just so heightened as far as the protests in this country and around the world. But parents, you have to, first of all, be willing to talk about it. You have to be willing to acknowledge the role that you have played, your family has played, that history has played, in denying that this is even an issue for entire culture of people in this country.
Good points there. I know I can think of 3 incidents that have occurred with children, and then it makes me wonder, some of this has to come from home. I remember when I was very young, a small child, another small child, about 5 or 6 or so, called me the N-word. This was at 5. You haven't been that many places. Things come from home. Watch the way you live,
Yes, ma'am.
not just what you teach verbally. Another incident was just a few months ago. I was in Walmart and the child was maybe 3 or 4, young enough to sit in the top part of the buggy. And he said, "You're chocolate, you're bad." And I thought I misunderstood. I really didn't think. I said, "What did you say, sweetheart?" He said, "You're chocolate, you're bad." Innocent look on the face. He just said it.
Didn't know it was wrong.
And I said, "Well, what's good? Is vanilla good?" And he said, "Yes, vanilla's good." And the mom or grandmother pushing the buggy just had this look of shock.
Yeah, because kids are going to tell the truth.
Attempting to explain to me why he was saying it. He must have been around other kids, blah, blah, blah. And I just I didn't want to address it too deeply because that wasn't the time nor the place. And I said, "You know what? Sometimes I like my ice cream chocolate and vanilla mixed, and that's really good too." And he just smiled so innocently, with the mom still kept the look of guilt on her face. Another instance was in my home in Farmington Hills at the time, when the neighbor came out, 9-year-old, and said, "We have to move." My mom said, "There are too many Black people moving into this subdivision."
Wow.
And I say that to say this: racism is coming from somewhere. It's coming from the home often. And we need to be mindful of that. And I think we need to dig within ourselves to see, where is the racism coming from? Are we just looking at the broad picture and saying, "Oh, it's KKK, it's white supremacists, or is it coming from home? What's in our hearts?" Because I think racism is coming from the heart.
So even just being in the education system, kids are not born to be racist. I just don't believe that. I believe kids are taught. They live in a household where things are said, where things are displayed, and working in a K-8 building, kids come to school and they're gonna tell the truth. Whatever come up half the time is going to come out. And so when we're in a parent-teacher conference and you hear some things and you look over at the adult that's in charge, and, "Well, he didn't mean that." Well, yes, he did mean it. He said it. He got it from somewhere. He didn't just make it up all of a sudden. It's something that a child is hearing at home. And so I think one of the things, like even what Dr. Rose and even Dr. Katherine, we've been saying all along, is that you got to talk about it. You can't act like it doesn't exist.
Right.
People, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, just when my youngest was in kindergarten, they're learning how to rhyme words, and they're, it's you know, they start off with one word and rhyming goes through as they go through the alphabet, they rhyme it with a C, then a D, then an F. When he was in kindergarten, he rhymed something to the point where it sounded like he said the N word.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, the kindergarten teacher like pulls me aside and she's so like, you wouldn't believe what your son said and da da da. And I go, well, like, and I had her explain the situation to me. So I got it. And I go, like, and I said, and it was kind of like, well, what did he do when you told him that was a bad word? She's like, oh, he was so shocked, but I think you need to know. And I'm like, but so she was calling like all this attention, like, oh, you did a bad thing, you did a bad thing. And it's like, it's an innocent 5-year-old that is rhyming words. So that was a really good thing. And the fact that the word that he was rhyming sounded just a little too much like that N word, I'm like, I think there was other way for her to take care of it without making him feel like so like, you know, evil demon kind of like, what did you do? And it was like one of those like going like, you've had conversations with my family, you know, we're okay. Like, you know, we have no, you know, we don't care who he hangs out with. We don't care who he's talking with. But yeah, if he's acting wrong, tell us if he's acting wrong. But the way she blew up him and that rhyming word, I was just so alarmed, being like, now who's got the issue? Because it's like, he's just a 5-year-old kid. You know, all you got to do is tell him like, no, that was a bad word. Like, just don't make it like this huge thing and then pull mom aside and make it another huge thing where you made him stand there and be like so solemn, where it was like, you know, I don't know what I did and why it was so bad. It's like, you know, yeah, I had the conversation with him and but again, a 5-year-old doesn't understand that that's not, you know, it's not a swear word. It's not one of those typical bad words.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to add it to when you were talking about how, you know, you'd have the conferences and somebody young might say something, but it's like, in our situation, he said it without knowing he said something.
Yeah.
And it bothered me that she blew it up so horribly, like almost like I have to take him down to the principal's office. It's like, that's not what he did. He didn't look at another student and call them that. He was rhyming words.
Yeah,
Right.
can I say that? And that's one of the that's one of the reasons it's important for us to have these type of dialogue, this type of dialogue, because only through dialogue does change occur, first of all.
Right.
And the fact that that teacher, because this is such a heated word,
Right.
her first instinct was, oh my God, I have to report it, as opposed to using it as a teachable moment.
Right,
It's just
right.
another example of how much we avoid having these discussions. Because if we just make this just part of our norm, normalizing racial conversations, it's amazing. I created a chart called the 5 stages of racial awakening that I shared on social media, and it got a lot of traction to it. And I received a lot of messages and inboxes from white individuals, mostly white women, but white men as well, you know, thanking me for that, and just admitting for them, they were totally clueless, which I understand. I know the majority of our society have been totally clueless to that they're privileged. Let's say that first of all. They've been totally clueless to the Black experience, daily experience, as a mother, as a parent of Black children, or just as a Black individual walking around in this country. And I appreciate it. Not every single person that messaged me, I took time out to write them back, to, you know, thank them for sharing my chart to their, you know, group of friends who've never seen that before. It doesn't, what I want, you know, individuals to know, non-Black individuals to know, it doesn't offend us to come and ask the questions. What offends us is to just avoid it, honestly, and to pretend like it doesn't exist.
I like how you said teachable moments, because that is key as developmentally as well. One day, Quentin and his Black friend Jonathan had their sweatshirts on, and they had their hoodies up. And I thought, I'm going to talk about this. So after, when Quentin got in the car, I said, I want to tell you something. I said, if you and Jonathan went in the store with your hoodies up and something came up missing, they're more apt to think that Jonathan stole it. And Quentin was like, why? Why would we steal it all, Mom? I said, it's not the point. I want you to understand that that's how it's going to be. I said, as you get older, if you and Jonathan go into a store and your hoodies are down and you're applying for the same job, you're more apt to get the job. And he's like, well, Mom, that's not fair. And I'm like, I know it's not fair, but you need to understand the inequality that is out there, and that Jonathan may experience. And I said, only us can change that. Only us can, as a people can make it okay that, to understand what's happening and to normalize it and use those teachable moments every opportunity that you can.
What is
But
the
parents
thought
have
when
to
we?
be aware of those things, because not a lot of white people know that
And-
that's what happens.
And you don't know what you don't know if you don't ask questions about it.
Right.
You can't talk to your white friend about Black people stuff. You got to ask Black people about
Right.
it.
Mhm.
When I moved into college, I had never, like I said, had never been around white people. So now I have to live with them. So the first question, they're asking me, I'm asking them, well, why do you wash your hair every day? And they're asking me, well, why don't you?
Yeah.
But had we not had those conversations, they wouldn't know. When my son was getting ready to drive, that was one of those moments where we had to talk about, this is what happens when you're driving and if you get pulled over. This is what you have to do as a Black man in America. You have to make sure we tell him to put his registration and stuff is above his visor. So that way, if he gets pulled over, he can just reach up there real quick and pull it down. You make sure your hands are on the steering wheel. We talk about 10 and 2. These are conversations that me as a Black mother and my husband, we have to have those conversations.
Right.
But we have to talk about things. We got to talk about it. And even in being an educator and being in schools can't be afraid to talk about social justice issues. They're not going to go away. And the more you don't want to talk about them, the more you don't want to deal with it, the more it is going to continue to rise. It's going to continue to increase. People got to have a voice. Everybody has to have a voice. Black, white, red, blue, or red, but things aren't happening to the blue, red, yellow, and green. It's the Black folks.
Right.
So we got to talk about it. If nothing, people don't take away from this conversation, nothing more than what even Dr. Rose and Dr. Katherine, what we've been saying. You have to talk about it. You can't act like it doesn't exist. It's not going away.
And Dr. Rose, already I'm getting people asking about that chart. So you mentioned that you're
Yeah.
going to have to share it with us in some form for sure.
I'll make sure I may be able to give it to you now.
Okay.
Now I'll pull it up while you guys talk.
All right. I also want to talk about, we talked about how we mentioned white privilege. And I wonder about that. And more than one, I'm kind of back and forth. Maybe the doctors can help with that, because when white children are taught white privilege, just that term alone, does that make them automatically feel superior in a sense, without subconsciously, just the term white privilege spoken to a child? Does that mean underprivileged when they see a Black? Because I always am concerned about what's going to make things equal. Where will we see equality and not pity? When we explain racism to our children, particularly non-Black children, are we talking in a sense of real equality, or let's understand that they've come from a place of slavery? Let's understand that they're dealing with poverty. Let's understand that a lot of the conversations that I hear from non-white people that I talk to are trying to convince understanding the hardships and not promoting the achievements, be it in school or not. Even in school, we don't hear that. And we'll get on that as well, because I'd like to talk about that. In school, we don't hear about the achievements of Blacks unless it's Black History Month, unless it's Martin Luther King's birthday, unless it's Rosa Parks something or another, unless we hear something, the death of an official, and then we'll try and promote that. But to put it in connection with other achievements, I don't see that. So can that be addressed, please?
Well, the friend that I'm referring to, Jonathan lives very similar socioeconomically as we do. So when I talk equality, Quentin doesn't think, oh, poor Jonathan lives, in poverty, I'm privileged.
Yeah.
But when we do talk about, because when you ask me at what age, my 8-year-old's watching Freedom with Cuba Gooding Jr. And, he's like, Mom, what's happening? And I just, I'm putting it out there. I want him to know that. So when we talk about what has happened to Black people for slaves and how they're brought over here, my son will say, I don't like white people. Oh, he's white, but he'll say that, I don't like white people. And I'm like, well, you're white, buddy. We got to figure out a better way to look at this. So I can only speak from where I'm coming from. I don't know, has that been your experience that
Oh, I often think so. Absolutely.
that you think that when children are taught that they think the poor Black people versus
I don't even know if they say the poor Black people, maybe not use those words, but I think the reason why things are not growing toward equality is because of the pattern of not teaching equality. We touch on equality a little bit, and we say that there's a need for equality. Even in schools, when we talk about Thomas Edison and the light bulb, we don't talk about Lewis Latimer, who did the filament for the light bulb. When we
Right.
talk about Henry Ford in the car, we don't talk about Garrett A. Morgan, who did the light to give direction to the car. When we talk about Alexander Graham Bell, we don't talk about Granville T. Woods, who improved the telephone and the different things. We don't put those and pair them together. We take a little bit of Black history and throw it in a corner or in a section. And it's like, oh, if you want to know more about Black people, go here. Well, that'll never teach equality.
And also the insensitivity. What my children, for the most part, went to predominantly white schools, unfortunately, because I wanted my kids to get a good education. And we know the disparity that exists, you
Yeah.
know, in schools where it's majority African American. But several years they've had assignments where their assignment was trace your family history. And their assignment was they had to go back to their great grandparents for this assignment. And my daughter comes home as a second or third grader, and I'm like, go back and tell your teacher. I was that mom that, and my kids are like, Mom, please don't go there. And I'm like, no, and
Me too.
Mom, my teacher wants to know where we came from. We came from slave ships in this country. That's where we came from. You know, we don't have the luxury necessarily of knowing people, our lineage past a certain grandparent because we were split up. Families were dispersed. Only now through all the 23andMe and DNAs are families starting to kind of come back together. I'm fortunate enough, I'll share this. I have a cousin who's a genealogist, and so he's dedicated much of his adult life to tracing our roots back. And so he traced roots back all the way back to the 1700s. Of course, these were enslaved individuals. The furthest we could go was Big Bob Ely, who was a breeder slave. So they used my great-great-great-grandfather as a breeder slave. His job was to just get all the women on the plantation pregnant. That was his job. And so we have a book, a 500-page book that my cousin published on our family history going back to this time with stories and newspaper articles and things of that sort. So one day, my youngest daughter, she couldn't have been any older than maybe fifth, sixth grade at the most. And we had this beautiful book sitting on our kitchen island. And her friend, a white girl, comes over and she's skimming through the book and she's amazed because she's looking at pictures. And then she gets to the part and she reads something and her eyes get like this big. And my daughter's like, what's wrong? And she goes, your family were slaves? Like, and my daughter's like, duh, how do you think I'm here? And it was like, as a fifth, sixth grader, had no clue what my daughter.
No,
Oh,
no, please don't freeze.
she froze.
Someone else jump in there. Yeah, so that's another example. Yeah, we're going to have her continue that story because that was very interesting. But that's another example how shocking so much information is to non-Blacks or.
I remember a school field trip where we were going to, and I want to say it was the museum in Hentry, and I'll make this quick. And we were in the part of the museum where they're replicating a ship with all the bodies, like all the slaves and how they were packed, like jam-packed in there. And of course, half the kids were all like, this is just scary, like to go down there and like, the mannequin bodies were just scary. But in the same sense, they were like, how can they even all fit? Like, that's not even right. Like, you can't, like, the kids are kind of making the joke of like, where's the VIP section? Like, it didn't seem so real to them until they saw it. And they saw, again, one, the mannequins were scary, but two, how packed they were, how scary that part was.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Rose, can you continue?
Where did I leave off? I apologize. I didn't know.
When she said you are a slave.
Yeah, your family were slaves, and my daughter's like, duh, like, yeah, but she was so, I mean, her eyes welled up. There was another experience, and this really, my daughter 1 year participated in a summer camp. I think it was the YMCA, 5th grade camp. You know how kids go to the 5th grade camp. And she came home and told me about how they emulated. And my son said, yep, they did it for me too. They emulated runaway slaves at the camp. And these were,
No.
yeah, they emulated that. They had horses, but they had the white children play the slaves. And my daughter says that so many of her friends, the white children, were crying because they had the kids run and now the horses, and when I heard, I went ballistic because my son told me, yeah, Mom, but he had never told me. So that's another thing. Even as my sons who are now late 20s, 28 and 23, as they're sharing things that they experienced that they never shared with me. Because there's a level of shame when you are targeted in that way that you don't even want to come home. There's shame, there's trauma, there's all that. You don't even want to come home and share that you experienced that with your parents, you know, because it's almost like reliving it. I remember the first time I was called the N-word. I never told my parents, and we were at great friends of our homes that we grew up. It was a white family that was like our twin family. I mean, our parents did things together. They would leave their children when they vacation, vice versa. It was just that type of thing. When they moved into a more predominantly white area, we went to visit them. And one of the kids in the neighborhood, that was the first time I'd ever been called, said, "What's this N doing here?" You know, and I remember just shrinking within myself. And I also remember never sharing that with my parents and it wasn't out of fear, it was out of shame. I also shared the story, my son, who is, when he was in his senior year of high school at Roper School, he was coming home from basketball practice, and I'm in the house and I'm washing my hair, and I get a frantic call from him. He's like, "Mom, come outside. The police the police have me here." And I come outside, I run outside, I put on a robe, you know, and I run outside barefoot. And now there's 2 police cars that's surrounding his car parked in front of our home. And I say, "What's going on?" They say, "Ma'am, get back." Like, I'm trying to run to my son and they stop me in my tracks. And I'm barefoot, hair all over my head. And I'm saying, you know, what's going on? Step back, you know. And my son's like, "They say I fit the description of not someone who committed a crime, someone who looked suspicious in the neighborhood, you know, in the subdivision." And my son is like, I'm telling them he came from basketball practice. He had his duffel bag, his Roper gym bag, his basketball on the passenger seat, you know, everything checks out with his car. I'm there and they're treating me like a common criminal as well. And I started rambling these things off. My son's an honor student. My son plays the piano. He plays classical piano. My son has an academic scholarship at Arizona State University. My son got it, and I'm rattling off all these things to give my son worth, you know. And it came instinctually. The next day, I had such a feeling of shame. In that moment, I wanted to save my son. The next day, I had such a feeling of shame that I had to, as a PhD, a doctor, someone who has way more education than these officers, you know, would ever have, that I had to sit there and be minimized to nothing and try to give my son value by rattling off the things that maybe society would see, make him worthy, so to speak. And so with the whole racial systemic racism, there's a lot of shame in our culture that we shouldn't even own, but it's implored upon us because it's part of our reality. We've been subjugated because of the color of our skin. And so you cannot tell me on a subconscious level that does not influence us us as Blacks in our daily interaction. That's why we even have this colorism issue in our culture,
Yes,
because
ma'am.
it's been embedded, it's been conditioned for so long. And as a psychologist, and I say this again, whatever learned can be unlearned. And so right now we have to be in this state of unlearning, and it has to unlearn. There's been research even shows epigenetic changes that racism has created in individuals, meaning individuals who have experienced the trauma of racism their DNA, their genetic makeup can actually be altered, where they are more susceptible to anxiety diseases and physical disease and things of that sort. So it's so pervasive, not just emotionally, but physically as well.
So powerful, you know, and I just had a conversation with someone who's non-Black about a police encounter at their home, and it was a totally different conversation, a totally different encounter where it was, oh, hi, sir. Oh, hi, ma'am. We were just checking. Completely different, which leads to a question that was submitted. How do parents talk to their children about the police, particularly when some have police in their families, some of their neighbors are police officers? How do we talk to them about police and Black Lives Matter, keeping the good cops intact, but making aware of police brutality and so forth? What is there a delicate way to talk to your children about it?
Well, it's not a delicate situation. So.
I was just thinking the same thing. Delicate, no.
It's part of our, fabric. It's part of our culture. And okay, so this just came to me. Let's go back to the historical, the development even of the police department. Now, what a great movie, 13th, Ava DuVernay's movie 13th is a great movie to educate individuals about how when slavery was ended, they still had farms and crops that needed to be tended to. And, you go from free labor to no labor. And so what came about, they started getting together and forming these police unions. So, and the freed Black slaves would now be targeted on the streets. Do you have your paperwork? Or you are going to jail for some minor offense, But that was their way of getting them in jail, because once they were in jail, they put them on, farms to work as part of their penalty. So this, this plantation to prison is a reality. So a large part, not all, because they're great cops, majority of cops I want to believe are great, but a lot of these police officers come from a lineage of people who come from that structure that was developed to target the Black man. Even on automatic, we talk about, people say, how can a cop see a 7-year-old playing with a toy gun in a park and their automatic instinct is to shoot and kill them? Because again, conditioning. Over time, the conditioning has been Black skin equals a threat. Black skin equals less than. Black skin needs to be annihilated. So when they see a kid, 7-year-old, playing with a toy gun in a park, it's no rationale or reasoning going on inside that brain. It's automatic, it's instinctual. As instinctual it would be if a mouse ran across any one of your desks right now, you jump up. Their instinct is, when they see that, act on it, annihilate, destroy, get rid of. So look at the history of police department. And this is why there needs to be police reform, because the truth is the foundation of the whole police department is built upon a union of individuals who were developed to bring, cheap labor back to the plantations that needed to be farmed.
So do we wait for our children to bring up the subject of racism, or do we initiate? Because often we're not even thinking about it. And I know we've addressed this a little bit already, but how do we just randomly start talking about racism, or do we wait until there's an issue? What do we do? Can anyone give some concrete
In our house,
statements of what you say?
in our house, we take the opportunity when something comes up, and it doesn't mean that it's an issue that my kids have had. It could be just watching a movie. It could be something that's happened at school. It can be just just life. And when those situations happen, it sparks the conversation. So we don't avoid it, but we don't randomly just bring up facts out of the blue for them, if that makes sense.
And I think that's pretty common, Amy. I do understand that, because if you aren't dealing with any particular subject, it probably doesn't come to your mind. But now that this is so much in the forefront, what do we do? What I think many non-Black parents don't know what to say. They really don't. I mean, they try and word it the best they can. What advice or suggestions or maybe some talking points can we use to start? Do we dive right into George Floyd, or what do we do to start the
It's
conversation?
a good starting point. I mean, because a lot of white families don't have reference. I've had the honor of growing up in a mixed family. And so for me, every time I think of something, a time my brother and I were at Don Pablo's restaurant here in Canton. My brother is 8 years younger than I am, but he's a big guy. He's 6'5" and light skinned. And we probably look like a couple. And we're sitting there and we're eating. And we had very poor service, and it clearly was a racial issue. And I lose my mind. And my brother said, don't. I said, well, I'm going to say something. I'm going to get the manager. He goes, don't. He said, because they're going to spit in our drink.
Yeah.
Something's going to happen. Don't. And so when I have these experiences, so if Quentin and I and Ron are in the restaurant, and I think of that, I said, one time your Uncle Paul and I were in the restaurant, and this is what happened.
Yeah.
So I have personal reference to continually bring it up. So I think, unfortunately, not everyone has the experience I've had. So if you may end up having to use the media as a jumping off point. But I think you can talk to anybody, your child at any age, about when they realize like that he was killed with a knee on his neck, to explain that, like, and start using that as a jumping off point. Do it if that's all you have.
Right.
And I know, Dr. Rose, you're in such popular demand. You have another appointment shortly, so you're going to have to get out a little bit earlier. But I'm going to have you back, because I think what you're saying.
What I'll do, this is just really quickly, I'll show you, I think I can share the screen. The 6 stages of an awakening America. So I'll send this to you as well, Gail.
Okay.
Put it on your, but denial, bargaining, anger, relapse, depression,
Great.
And acceptance and finding meaning. So what we have to do now is we have to start finding meaning. We have to acknowledge these stages that we are going through. A lot of people are still in this stage of denial. A lot of still want to bargaining. Okay, I know, even with the killing of the officer, well, we don't know the whole story. With a knee on the neck, it doesn't matter what the whole story was, the fact that this man, died that way. So I'll share that with you guys, but I do appreciate, Gail, first of all, you just taking this time and effort to put this dialogue together. And anytime you want me back, just let me know.
I'll have you back soon.
Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dr. Rose.
we're gonna have to steal her too, Gail. We need her to come.
I know,
and talk.
right? Everywhere. Huh?
Absolutely. Very nice to meet you, Dr. Rose.
Nice to meet you.
And we are going to continue the conversation, even though Dr. Rose had to leave. We have Dr. Katherine here, and she is knowledgeable as well, and she can share with us. And I like to hear the different perspectives, because I think it's very important, and that we share and not be ashamed of what we're not teaching our children, what we need to teach our children, what we don't know. And let's talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's the breaking point. So many people are afraid to say what they have not shared at home. I respect you, Amy, for saying, you really haven't talked about racism because it hasn't been necessary in your lifestyle at times. I mean, when something happens, then you speak on it. But now that it is time, I think we need to really enforce the importance of speaking about racism, and not just in terms, and I like to say this more and more, we need to build equality. Right. Whatever we say to our children, it needs to go in the direction of we are equal. Let's talk
one of the things I would add, I see in my practice, is that we have a generation of, let's say, 30, 40-year-olds that I treat, and they want to break away from the generational whiteism. And they are somewhat afraid of losing their family. because there is such hidden racism or unspoken racism, you know, that if they were to bring equality into their home, in their current family, their extended family, then they risk being cut off from their children having grandparents or grandmothers, you know, the grandfather, the grandmother, because they still have beliefs of segregation. And so that is an ongoing issue, because they want their children, they want to stop it, but then how do they stop it with their parents, the grandparents, and even great grandparents? It makes it very, very difficult, because now they're feeling they have to choose.
Yeah, and what will they choose? Will they choose the Black people, or will they choose the family? They'll choose
They're
the
going to
family.
choose the family.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so then they, you know, they are trying, I've noticed that they try the best that they can to, you know, bring about change, but it's sort of, but when grandma and grandma come around, we don't talk about it. We just don't talk about it. We don't talk about those Black friends that you have. We just kind of keep it status normal, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gail, there's a question that was on X. Can I give educators some strategies to be proactive rather than reactive? And I think being an educator, we have a lot of power, a lot of authority. We can make or break children. But I think one thing that we need to do as educators is to call out other educators who we know are not being politically correct, I guess you could say. You need to call it out. That's the first thing. You know, when we're in the teacher's lounge and teachers are talking, oh, this kid here, and you know that it's a racial incident, or you know that it's race related, I think the first thing we need to do is just call it out, call it as it is. The other thing is that we need to teach our children in our classroom that we are all equal. Everybody has a chance to be the leader, the first person in line. One strategy could be you rotate your kids in line, last name, first name, but you don't make it appear that one person is better than the other. You have to be open and honest with where you are as an educator when it comes to race. And if there are things that you don't know, reach out. Hey, Paula, or hey, Gail, Dr. Katherine, Miss Saunders, I have a question about something that's going on. Amy, I'm real trying to be calm about the way that your child was treated, because that was just completely inappropriate. There's a way that we can handle things when things happen. Hey, okay, we're going to talk about this. And hey, Amy, by the way, we had a little bit of an incident today, and I just wanted to share, this could be a teachable moment for you. I know he didn't mean any harm by it, because we're doing rhyming. So you have to be appropriate, but you have to first see where you are individually. If you have questions as an educator, you have questions because there's things, again, like I said earlier, you don't know about Black people. If you want to know about us, you ask us. After we sing, we have dialogue, and then you can incorporate that in your lesson. There's always Black history that you can incorporate in your lessons. In your classroom, you put up pictures of George Washington, you put up pictures of Black people as well. There are more important Black people besides Harriet Tubman, who, don't get me wrong, my girl, yep. But the mainstream people. It's a matter of research. Everything is on Google. So I think as an educator, you want to make sure you start first with yourself, first making sure that you understand, first checking to see what your issues and your concerns are, and then you can move along in your classroom. But making sure that all kids feel welcome no matter what happens in your classroom. You try very hard not to be punitive with the little Black boy who's having issues versus the little white boy who is, making sure, because kids watch what you do.
Yes.
They watch how you treat one another. They watch what you do, and they have a keen sense of saying, if I do that, this is going to happen to me. But if they do that, this is what's going to happen to them. So as educators, we want to definitely be proactive. Talk about where you are. Talk to somebody, and then making sure that in your classroom, your kids are getting a fair chance, that everything is as equitable as it can be.
I think due to the age of when it happened, I mean, he was a kindergartner. He was, basically 5-6 years old. I think her reaction is more warranted if he was double that. If he was a 12-year-old, a middle schooler, a high schooler, then I think she can be like, better. Like, what words are okay and what words aren't okay. I mean, at 5 years old, we're still learning sight words. We haven't I haven't gotten into a conversation with my son saying, don't say this, don't say that, because they're not that they're a swear word, but that they're an offensive word, like, as in a racially offensive word. And so I think her reaction was just not connected to his age. It was like, you need to, like pause for a second and look at the fact of who are we talking about? We're talking about a 5-year-old here. We're talking about a 5-year-old where I've got other kids in the building and none of them have ever, made some type of reference like that. So I think you need to pause and, like you said, use it as a learning thing for maybe like either the entire group or anyone who was around him at that point when he was doing it. Because again, he's so proud of himself that he's rhyming things. And it's like, you then shamed him. And it's like, no, we need to pause at this.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we got to make sure again that we talk about things. Everybody's walking on eggshells,
Yeah.
and we got to get past that and say, hey, I don't understand and I want to learn. This particular situation happened and can I run this by you? Can I talk to you about it? That's what I really think as educators, we got to dig deep, because we have a lot of power being in the classroom. We were kids more than they're with their parents.
What do we say to parents that say, I feel attacked, or through this whole conversation, I feel attacked at this. I'm doing my best. I'm not racist. I'm doing my best. What can we speak on that? Because some people are trying, I guess, maybe, but not necessarily hard enough, or not necessarily the right approach, or maybe they're doing fine. What can we address to the parent who feels attacked about the conversations? Doctor.
Can you be more specific? What part?
I know some non-Black parents that say, I'm not racist, and I feel like being accused of not teaching my kids all about Black Lives Matter, or not teaching my kids about systemic racism doesn't mean that I'm racist, and I'm offended.
Well, because, unfortunately, being silent about it is racist. If you're being silent and you're not talking about it, then why aren't you talking about it? And you're kind of saying that Black lives don't matter if you don't talk about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, does to me.
So if they feel attacked, well, then they're going to feel attacked. Unfortunately, everybody, from a psychologist's perspective, everybody has their lens in which they see the world, and they may not see that this is an issue, and they may not feel that, unfortunately, a lot of white people think, like the quota. Well, enough Black people have, reached doctor status. Enough Black people have, moved into Bloomfield Hills. Enough Black people have, and so it's like, okay, what's the problem?
That's
and
what I meant. Yeah.
That's where that makes sense.
Yes. But then, with that said, when you assess yourself, I don't know, I call it a test, but maybe I think how many non-Blacks will say, I'm going to deliberately get a Black accountant to manage my money. I'm going to deliberately get a Black dentist to doctor on my children's teeth. I'm going to do things to show, or I don't even know if it's show, but, and I don't even know if what I'm saying is correct, but if you go out of your way, sometimes you need to go out of your way to make a point. I mean, you do it if it's not race occasionally. I mean, not just to say, okay, Black Lives Matter, history was wonderful. We all know who invented the light bulb, but I mean, point on in your home, show something so your children will see more than what they see necessarily on the news, just the negativity. Oh, it's killing, oh, what's that? And then we try and explain that. Show the positive, and maybe that will make a greater impact than just trying to teach it with our mouths and what we say. Is that making
Well, I
any
know
sense?
after the knee incident that a group that I belong to, it's a mom group of like Novi, Northville, Plymouth, and surrounding area, something along those lines. And those moms on there were immediately saying, I need a caterer. Do you know a Black one? I need a seamstress. Do you know a Black one? And the whole news feed was just flooded because they wanted to make sure that they were giving their business. And down at the farmers market in downtown Plymouth, there's, it was interesting because one lady wanted a black baker, and she happened to be there at the farmer's market. And I'm like, oh, I know about you. And Quentin loves her gluten-free brownies or their donuts of some kind. And I do think you have to make an effort to do it, to make sure that your children, if nothing else, that your children see you doing it.
Mhm.
Quentin's first pediatrician was black, and Dr. Mitchell at U of M. And I just bawled when she quit because I just loved her. So I think that when you live out loud, and
Mhm.
you're making those choices, and your children see you making that choice. And I don't mean like, well, we're going to pick a black baker.
Right.
It's like, you just do it. You just
Yes.
live it. If I'm going to make a change personally, I don't announce it to Quentin like,
Mhm.
I'm going to parent you differently today. I just
Exactly,
start
yes.
living it, right? Start
Mhm.
doing it. And I think that that's what, because the children are always watching. They're
Yep.
always watching. And, a look that you give, they know it. A tone that you give, you'll see it in them. And
Mhm.
so parents really have to just make an effort to really just live it in their heart and let their children see them live out loud.
I like that. How did it get to be 7:30 already? We're going to have to
Is it
continue this
really?
conversation another time.
Oh.
But I like the closing statement that you made. Your children
Live
are
out
always
loud.
watching and live out
Yeah.
loud. Excellent conversation. We're
Perfect.
going to have a part 2 because there's so much more that we can do to talk about this. But I want to thank you, Dr. Katherine. Thank Dr. Rose. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Amy, and everyone for tuning in. If you want that chart, email me, ganderson@novilibrary.org, and I'll send it out to you. Tune in next week, the 30th at 6:30 p.m. There will be another Talking Race Relations program. This will be Why Take a Knee. That will be the topic for that discussion. Please join us, and thank you for joining us this evening, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mhm.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Catherine.
Nice to meet
you,
you.
Amy.